Hello, namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. More than a month after the tragedy in Ahmedabad, the Air India crash report is out. It has 15 pages, a lot of technical details, a detailed sequence of events. But by the time you finish reading it, you're left with more questions than answers. We will discuss why. Also in focus, India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar is in China. His first visit in 5 years. We'll tell you what's on the agenda. In the West, old allies are dealing with new cracks, while Europe is pivoting away from the US. And speaking of rifts, Donald Trump now says he's disappointed with Vladimir Putin. So he's sending missiles to Ukraine. Why Macron wants to double the defense spending of France, and what does it mean for Europe? Why Bangladesh's Yunus has sent mangoes to Prime Minister Modi. Why Trump supporters are upset with him. A report on the MAGA meltdown over Epstein files. Why thousands of Afghans who helped American soldiers against the Taliban now face the prospect of deportation from the US. And what is aura farming? Monday motivation from an Indonesian boy's dance moves. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. At least 89 people killed in southern Syria and more than 100 have been injured after clashes erupted between Sunni Bedouin tribes and Druze fighters. The military has been deployed to bring the situation under control. This is the latest instance of sectarian violence in Syria in recent months. Bitcoin hits a lifetime high, jumps nearly 3% as it breaches $120,000 for the first time. Investor optimism is largely driving this rally. Bitcoin is the world's largest cryptocurrency. It has gained nearly 30% this year. Cambodia's military will begin conscripting civilians from next year. Phnom Penh cites tensions with Thailand as the reason for this move. In 2006, Cambodia's parliament passed a law requiring all citizens aged 18 to 30 to serve in the military for 18 months, but it has never been enforced. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa suspends his police minister, who is a key ally, over alleged criminal connections. The sacked minister is accused of sabotaging a probe into political assassinations. Ramaphosa has appointed an Indian origin law professor as the acting minister. And thousands of South Korean medical students are set to return to the classrooms, ending their 17-month boycott. Last year, then President Yoon Suk Yeol had sought to increase medical school admissions. The move led to junior doctors going on strike and medical students skipping classes. Investigations are supposed to bring closure, to answer the confusing questions, but not this one. The latest report on the Air India crash does the opposite. It adds to the confusion. It raises more questions than it answers. Now, just to be clear, this is not the final report. This is a preliminary assessment. Yet, the language and the tone make one thing clear. It was not a machine problem, nor was it a carrier problem. So basically, don't blame Boeing or Air India. Then whose problem was it? Let's take it from the top. The preliminary report was published on Saturday. The probe was led by India's Aviation Ministry. They got inputs from other sources as well, like the US Aviation Authority, Boeing, and former pilots. Most of the report is routine. It talks about the condition of the plane. It mentions the experience of the pilots, and there's nothing alarming in those parts. But in the final pages, the report details the accident. Let me piece together the timeline. Around 11 a.m. on June 12th, the plane arrived in Ahmedabad. Air India Boeing 7878. Around 12 p.m., it is cleared for its next flight from Ahmedabad to London. At 1:26 p.m., the plane is cleared to taxi. At 1:37 p.m., the plane is cleared for takeoff. Around 39 seconds past 1:38 p.m., the aircraft lifted off. 3 seconds later, it reached peak speed. And this is where things get confusing. After reaching peak speed, both the fuel switches were turned off. That too within a second of each other, both the switches. We'll explain these switches in detail, but for now, just know this. These switches control the flow of fuel into the engines. If they're turned off, the engines do not get fuel. And this report says that this is what happened. The fuel switches were turned off, so the engines were getting no fuel. At this point, the pilots were talking to each other. One pilot asks the other, why did he cut off? The other one replies that he did not. As they speak, the plane is probably losing lift. 13 seconds after takeoff, the fuel switches toggle again. The switch for the first engine turns on. Then 4 seconds later, the second switch also turns on. So the first engine begins to recover, but the second engine could not recover. And by that time, it was too late. Around 11 seconds after 1:39 p.m., the flight recorder stops recording. This is what we know from the investigation report, the preliminary report. Clearly, the fuel cutoff switches are key to what happened. So let's take a closer look at them. These two switches are located on the console. One switch for each engine. There are two engines, so there are two switches. If you turn them on, the engines get fuel. If you turn them off, the fuel is cut off. It's as simple as that. Now, the switches have dual protection. First, you can see the brackets on either side. This is meant to ensure that pilots do not accidentally hit the switch. Then there is a lock mechanism. You can't just toggle it like a normal switch. You must lift the switch first, then toggle it to run or cut off mode. As the name suggests, run allows fuel supply, cut off shuts the fuel supply. The whole idea is to ensure that there are no accidents. Now, this report does not assign blame directly, but you get the drift. It suggests that someone or something turned off the fuel switches. And India's Pilots Association is not happy about this assessment. They have criticized what they call bias towards pilot error. That's what pilots are saying, the Pilots Association. Same with the victims' families. They're calling this report vague. And that is the problem here. This report raises way too many questions. Tonight, we'll focus on the two most important ones. Number one, why is the cockpit audio incomplete? The report only paraphrases a short exchange. It does not identify the speakers, nor does it give us the whole transcript. And experts have questioned this lack of information. They say it's important to identify both the speakers, review the conversations, and publish the transcripts. The question is, why did the investigators not do this already? Why haven't they done this? Why did they publish this short, paraphrased exchange and not the whole thing? It's almost like they wanted to lead people on. So that is the first thing that needs to be answered. The second question is this: why is there mention of an old fuel switch advisory? This one, it dates back to 2018. It was issued by the US Aviation Authority. And what did this advisory say? It said that the fuel switch's locking mechanism was potentially compromised. Basically, the lock may disengage on its own. Now, this advisory was meant for the Boeing 737 plane. But the same system is used in the 787 as well, the plane that crashed. Did Air India get it checked? No, they did not. They said the notice was not mandatory, it was just an advisory. It did not compromise the airworthiness of the plane. That's what Air India is saying. And yet, this advisory finds mention in the probe report, which makes you wonder, could the switch have unlocked on its own? And if it did, Could it have toggled to cut off position? Also, what if there was an electronic issue? Could it have tripped the fuel switch automatically? Like I said, lots of questions. Unfortunately, we do not know the answers because the report gives us open-ended information. Information that can lead to many assumptions and interpretations, which is not the point of a probe. A probe is supposed to give us clarity. Also, the bias against pilots is quite evident. Both of them went down with the plane. It's very easy to suggest that their actions led to this crash. After all, they cannot now defend themselves. So here's what we say. Don't give us half-baked information. Be clear about the events and the findings, because this is not just about a technological mystery. This is about closure for families. 241 people died on that plane. Their families deserve clear answers, not speculation and half facts. Now let's talk about China. They're hosting India's External Affairs Minister. Dr. S. Jaishankar is in Beijing. This is his first visit to China in 5 years. And he's there for the SCO Foreign Ministers' meeting. SCO, as you would know, stands for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This is a grouping of Eurasian countries. Both India and China are members, so are Pakistan and Russia. This group has a total of 9 members, the SCO. This year, China holds the SCO presidency. Last month, SCO defense ministers had met, and India's Defense Minister Rajnath Singh went to China for that meeting. Now the foreign ministers are meeting, so it is S. Jaishankar's turn. He started off by raising a crucial issue, cross-border terrorism. Today, Dr. Jaishankar met the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and he brought up the SCO's mandate to fight terror.
Tomorrow, we will be meeting in the format of the SCO, whose primary mandate is to combat terrorism, separatism, and extremism. This is a shared concern, and India hopes that zero tolerance for terrorism will be strongly upheld.
India wants zero tolerance on terrorism. But clearly, some countries think zero tolerance is optional. And China appears to be one such country. It openly supports a terror state called Pakistan. Pakistan treats terrorist groups like government departments. Their goal is to hurt India, and China supports them both militarily and diplomatically, arming them on the battlefield and shielding them at the United Nations. You may remember what happened in the month of May when India launched Operation Sindoor. China rushed to support Pakistan. It gave live inputs to Pakistan about Indian deployments. It even supplied weapons to Pakistan, weapons that were used against Indian citizens. That's the military support that China is giving. Similarly, China supports Pakistan diplomatically. Last month, defense ministers of the SCO met, like I just told you, Rajnath Singh from India, Khwaja Asif from Pakistan. At the end of the meeting, they usually release a joint statement. India wanted a mention of the Pahalgam attack, but China blocked it.
Peace and prosperity cannot coexist with terrorism and the proliferation of weapons of the mass destruction in the hands of the non-state actors and the terror groups. Some countries use cross-border terrorism as an instrument of policy and provide shelter to terrorists. There should be no place for such double standards. Yes, you should not hesitate to criticize such nations.
So China blocked this statement. As a result, there was no declaration at the end because India refused to sign off on the statement. One can expect a similar standoff this week as well at the SCO Foreign Ministers' meeting because China is still avoiding the issue of terrorism. Even today, they did not mention it. In the statements issued after China's meeting with Jaishankar, no mention of cross-border terrorism was made. Instead, the Chinese talked about dancing with dragons and elephants. This is a reference to China and India, dragon and elephant. Well, China may want to tango, but India has good reasons to be wary. There may be a consensus to end border tensions, but new flashpoints are emerging. Recently, we saw that over Tibet. Their biggest leader, the Dalai Lama, lives in India. It's a constant pain point for Beijing. Earlier this month, the Dalai Lama spoke about succession, about who will choose his heir, who will be the next Dalai Lama. He said his inner circle of monks would make that decision when the time comes. But China does not agree with that.
The reincarnation of the 14th Dalai Lama himself was also approved by the then central government of China through such a procedure, and the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama, who succeeds the seated Dalai Lama, must be carried out in accordance with the above principles, religious rituals and historical customization, and in accordance with the laws and regulations of the state.
Beijing wants to install its own Dalai Lama. Just yesterday, the Chinese embassy released a statement. It called Tibet a thorn in India-China relations. In fact, let me quote from the Chinese statement. Playing the Xizang card will definitely end up shooting oneself in the foot. Xizang is China's name for Tibet. So on one hand, China talks of normalization, something that India also wants. But on the other hand, China's actions leave little room for trust. It arms a terror state like Pakistan. It stokes tensions along the border. It speaks of partnership while undermining India's security. S. Jaishankar's visit to China is a welcome step towards dialogue, but let's not pretend it's back to business as usual, because until China walks the talk, India should engage with eyes wide open and the guard up.
He talks nice and then he bombs everybody in the evening. There's a little bit of a problem there.
Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, they have always shared warm ties. In the 2016 presidential election, in the campaign, Trump praised Putin. When Trump won the election, Putin was among the first leaders to congratulate him. Trump often calls him a genius. He's always willing to meet Putin. This year, when he returned to the White House, Trump dialed up the friendliness. There were multiple phone calls and joint diplomatic efforts. Trump even blamed Ukraine for the war. But of late, there's been a shift in energy.
Because Putin really surprised a lot of people. He talks nice and then he bombs everybody in the evening. So there's a little bit of a problem there, and I don't like it.
Translation, you're not the man I thought you were. Donald Trump says Putin talks nice, but then he bombs Ukraine, and the US president does not like that. Trump, for all his transactional instincts, hates being played. And according to insiders, he felt played. So now he's rooting for the other team, meaning he's backing Ukraine. Today, he hosted the NATO chief in the White House. It is this man, Mark Rutte. Trump says the US will be sending weapons to NATO. The military alliance will be paying for those weapons. And those weapons will then be sent to Ukraine.
They have a lot of money and they want to do it. They feel very strongly about it. And we feel strongly about it too. But we're in for a lot of money and we don't want to do it anymore. And we can't. But we make the best, and we're going to be sending the best to NATO. NATO is going to take care of it. It's going to be coordinated by NATO.
Not just that, Trump is also planning to impose secondary tariffs on Russia. That is, if they don't agree to a peace deal in 50 days. According to Trump, the tariffs could be as high as 100%. 100% tariffs on Russia. Russia is already the most sanctioned nation in the world. It is subject to more than 20,000 sanctions. So this is unlikely to make much of a difference.
We don't have an agreement in 50 days. That's what we're doing. Secondary tariffs. And they're biting. And I hope we don't get to the point where we do. But I've been hearing so much talk. It's all talk. It's all talk, and then missiles go into Kyiv and kill 60 people. It's got to stop.
So Trump is sending weapons to Ukraine and threatening sanctions on Putin. This is a clear pivot. Donald Trump had pledged to end the Ukraine war in one day within 24 hours of taking office. So he withheld military aid. He publicly berated Ukrainian President Zelensky at the White House. He said peace was not possible without him and Putin in the same room. But forget ending the war in one day. It's been almost 6 months and there seems to be no end in sight. Something has clearly snapped. Trump is sending Patriot missile systems to Ukraine. He hasn't decided on the number yet, but he believes that Ukraine needs protection, hence the missiles. But like we said, Washington won't foot the bill. Trump said NATO will be paying for this.
They're going to pay us 100% for them, and that's the way we want it. And we've been trying to get that again. I don't think Biden ever asked for it. We're in for about $350 billion. Europe is in for $100 billion. That's a lot of money, 100, but they should be in actually for more than us. So as we send equipment, they're going to reimburse us for that equipment. Doesn't that sound good? That's the way it should have been a long time ago.
Donald Trump came to power dissing Biden's war policies. He promised to get America out of it. And yet, just months later, Trump is doing the very same thing. Trump, too, is sending weapons to Ukraine. His supporters may not be very happy about it. But if there's one party cheering this move, it is, of course, Ukraine. This pivot is like a lifeline for them. Russia has been ramping up its attacks in the last few weeks. Just days ago, it launched the biggest aerial attack since the war began. People are being killed. Cities are burning. So Ukraine needs some leverage. And these Patriot missile systems will provide that, even though they're unlikely to change the course of the war. As we speak, U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, is in Kyiv. He met with President Zelensky, and the two discussed air defenses.
We have often meetings with you and your team. Thanks to your team also for coming to Kyiv. Thank you so much. We are thankful to President Trump for his all messages and very strong decisions about resuming delivers for us, and we are thankful for bipartisan support.
But Kyiv is still being cautious. After all, they have learned to not read too much into Trump's words. As for Russia, they're not reacting very strongly to it. Today, Moscow talked about the weapons deliveries, how the West keeps sending weapons to Ukraine, but they strictly stopped short of directly slamming Trump.
A lot of words have been said about how expensive it is and so on. Now it looks like European countries will be paying for these supplies. Something they'll pay for, something they won't. But the fact remains that supplies of weapons, ammunition, and military equipment from the U.S. to Ukraine have continued and are continuing.
So what happens now? For Trump, everything is a negotiation. He needed Putin on his side for a bigger goal, which is peace in Ukraine. But Putin sees deals as a weakness, so he did not budge. And the most humiliating part for Trump, Putin did not give him a win. So now the US president's patience appears to have run out. But let's be clear, this is not a full pivot to the Biden-era Ukraine policy. Trump still wants to look like the guy who ends wars. The weapons being shipped are mostly defensive. Also, Trump may be sending missiles, but he's still trying to frame it as a business deal. Just a transaction where NATO pays, America profits, and Trump looks tough. So the missiles are flowing again. But don't mistake this for a love letter to Kyiv, because for Trump, loyalty is conditional. And when the deal stops making sense, so does the friendship. Putin gave him nothing to sell back home. For a man who hates looking weak, that is unforgivable. Right now, this is not a full breakup, at least not yet, but it's a cold shoulder, maybe a warning shot to the Russians. That even Trump's favorite strongmen do not get unlimited passes. Playground, puppet, and partner. Europe has been a lot of things for the US. In many ways, this relationship defined the second half of the 20th century. It created many of the institutions we still use. But now, that special relationship is at risk. Why? Thanks to Donald Trump. He's not a big fan of Europe. Whether it's on trade, defense, or technology, Trump feels that Europe is ripping America off. His solution? Impose tariffs on them. The US president has announced 30% tariffs on European goods, 30%. They will kick in on the 1st of August. Initially, the EU, the European Union, was planning to respond. They had prepared tariffs of their own, but now they've hit pause. Brussels is going to wait until early August. They want to try talks first. And it's clear why. The US-EU goods trade is worth $975 billion. $975 billion. European exports make up $605 billion. American exports make up $370 billion. So the trade is stacked in Europe's favor. Imagine a 30% tariff on this exchange. EU officials fear it would effectively end transatlantic trade.
Practically, it prohibits the trade. So if you're talking about 30% or 30% plus, there will be a huge impact on trade. It will be almost impossible to continue the trading as we are used in a transatlantic relationship.
The problem is obvious. Europe is too dependent on the US. Washington makes up 20% of total European exports. So naturally, the EU is worried. They would much rather sign a deal than pick a fight. But here's the problem. That's a short-term fix. In the long term, Brussels seems to be looking at a permanent solution. And what's that? What is a permanent solution to this problem? A divorce with America. Europe has long talked about de-risking from China. They could now de-risk from the US as well. French President Macron proposed this during his visit to London.
If we compare our countries with the United States, but we will have as well to de-risk our two countries for the excessive dependencies on both the US and China.
So what's the plan here? We'll discuss the defense strategy later. For now, let's look at the finances. The EU is looking to diversify its markets. They're eyeing more trade with Canada, more trade with the UK, and also more in Asia. For example, India and the EU are expected to sign a free trade deal this year. That would give Europe a large market. They're also looking at a deal with Indonesia. In fact, the Indonesian president is in Europe this week. He agreed to work towards a trade agreement.
We're living in turbulent times, and when economic uncertainty meets geopolitical volatility, partners like us must come closer together. So today we're taking a big step forward in this partnership, and we're doing so in three key areas. The first is trade. I am very pleased to report that we have just reached a political agreement on an ambitious free trade agreement.
That's a clear plan. Strike out on your own, explore new markets, and reduce dependence on the United States. That is the plan. If successful, it will reverse decades of American policy. Just think back to the Second World War. Nazi Germany was rampaging through Western Europe. It was the US that rescued them. Even after the war, the rescue continued. The US decided to rebuild and re-industrialize Europe. The continent had been shattered by war, so Washington decided to pump money into their economy. Thus emerged the Marshall Plan. It is named after a former US Secretary of State. It was passed by the US Congress in 1948, the Marshall Plan. What did it do? The Marshall Plan pumped $12 billion into rebuilding Europe. It may not sound like a lot of money today, but remember, we're talking about 1948. 12 billion meant a lot more back then. There's a lot of debate around why America did this. Why did they spend this kind of money? Secretary Marshall was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. But this was not just a humanitarian gesture, because aid is more often than not political and strategic. Look at this American aid in the Marshall Plan. Why was it limited to Western Europe? Why not war-torn Eastern Europe? Because the East was Moscow's turf. Clearly, there was a strategic reason. The US wanted to limit Soviet influence in Europe. They wanted to recruit allies in Europe in the looming fight against Moscow. So whatever the trigger for this aid, it was effective. The Marshall Plan successfully reignited Europe's economy. It also created a strong transatlantic bond. Which brings us to present day. Does Donald Trump care about this bond? Not from the looks of it. He recently said the EU was formed to, quote-unquote, screw the US.
The European Union's it was formed in order to screw the United States. I mean, look, let's be honest. The European Union was formed in order to screw the United States. That's the purpose of it. And they've done a good job of it, but now I'm president.
Well, that simply is not true. Yes, the EU was created in the European continent, but it had its roots in America. US lawmakers argued for a federal Europe. They talked about creating a United States of Europe, like the United States of America. So make no mistake, the EU was indirectly an American creation, and it served them well. It served the Americans, often at the expense of the Europeans. The latest reminder came from Jamie Dimon. He is the chief of JP Morgan. He was recently in Ireland. He told Europe that you're losing. Losing in what? Competitiveness, in the ability to create big corporations. And he has a point. Europe never built its own systems. They simply bought from the Americans, whether it's weapons or social media platforms, AI or semiconductors. They kept buying, and that policy was built on a major assumption. The assumption that Washington would always stand by Europe. But with Donald Trump, that's out the window. He doesn't see long-term strategy or gains. He sees short-term transactions, hence his focus on tariffs and defense budgets. There's nothing Europe can do immediately to counter this, but in the long run, Europe has multiple options to explore. The world is heading towards multipolarity. You would bet on Brussels becoming one of those poles. Every year on July 14th, France explodes in patriotic spectacle. It's for Bastille Day, a national holiday in the country. It marks the storming of the Bastille prison in 1789 that led to the French Revolution. It was once a furious uprising, but now it's more of a celebration. The tricolour flags are out, jets streak across the Paris sky, military bands march down the Champs-Élysées, tourists cheer and the president waves. But ahead of all this pageantry, French President Emmanuel Macron dropped a bombshell.
The
military budget in 2017 was 32 billion euros. An additional effort of 3.5 billion euros in 2026 and another 3 billion euros the following year will be added to the current military programming law. Therefore, we will allocate 64 billion euros for our defense in 2027. This is double the budget the armed forces had in 2017.
C'est le double du budget.
So France is boosting its defense spending. It will add $7.5 billion in military spending over the next 2 years. This is on top of an already ambitious plan. President Macron wants to double France's defense budget by 2027. Look at where he started. He took office in 2017. The French defense budget in 2017 was 32 billion euros, which is around 37 billion US dollars. 2017, 37 billion US dollars. By the end of his second term, in the year 2027, the defense budget will hit 64 billion euros, which is around 74 billion dollars. So Macron plans to double the budget on his watch. And he has given an ominous reason for that.
Votre engagement.
We have long been aware of the imminence of these changes, and they are now taking effect. Probably never since 1945 has freedom been so threatened, and never before has peace on our continent depended so much on our present decisions.
Macron wants France to become a military superpower. Why? Because according to him, Europe is facing its biggest threat since World War II. There's a war raging on its borders. There's the threat from Russia. America is increasingly focusing on itself, so Paris is calling for a reset. It wants to grow its defense machinery and defend Europe.
It is this effort that will allow us to ensure our credibility with our partners, to continue to have the most efficient army in Europe, to forge new partnerships, like this week with the United Kingdom.
Sera donc financé par plus d'activités.
Now, to understand this pivot, we need to go back in history. France has always seen itself as more than just a country, more like a republic with a mission. Historically, it's been a military heavyweight. There were the Napoleonic Wars and the colonial campaigns in Africa. France's military once projected power across the globe, but the 20th century changed all of that. There were 2 world wars, the colonial empire collapsed, so France retreated from global ambitions. By the early 2000s, its military posture was restrained. The Cold War was over, the peace dividend had arrived, defense spending hovered around 2% of the GDP. So France shifted its priorities. It focused on education and social welfare. But the last 5 years have changed that. In 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Tanks were rolling at Europe's borders again. For Macron, this was a turning point. It showed how unprepared Europe was. And then came the US elections. Until 2024, Europe was under the assumption that the US would always ride to its rescue. But Donald Trump has busted that. So Macron is pivoting fast. He wants France to become a military power in its own right, not just to defend itself, but to lead Europe. And that's the essence of the Macron doctrine: deterrence through strength. Also, France is the only EU country with its own nuclear arsenal. So Macron is using that as leverage. He's talking about a European umbrella, using French nukes to protect the continent, sort of like an extended deterrence. In some corners of the EU, this sounds like leadership. In others, it sounds like ambition. And here's where things get tricky. Listen to this.
En tout état de cause, nous refusons que ce réarmement.
In any case, we refuse to let this rearmament go through debt. Our military independence is inseparable from our financial independence. It will therefore be funded by more activity and more production.
Et plus de production.
Macron says the new defense spending won't be paid for with more debt. And that's a big promise. France is already dealing with a massive national debt. Just servicing that debt costs the Treasury $72 billion a year. So where will this extra money come from? Social programs, pensions, healthcare? It's not clear, and France is not alone in this dilemma. Europe is staring at a massive defense boost. At the NATO summit, countries pledged to raise defense spending. By 2035, they hope to bring it to 5% of the GDP, 5% defense spending. But is this sustainable? Raising defense budgets means hard choices. In Greece, pensions may be squeezed. In Belgium, new taxes are being discussed. In the UK, foreign aid has already been diverted. So governments are now caught in a struggle. Do they maintain welfare states, or do they build war machines? And those are some big questions for Europe. In 1789, the people of France stormed the Bastille to take back their freedom. In 2025, their government is spending billions to defend that freedom. This Bastille Day, France is staging more than just a parade. It is staging a return. But will it work out? As they say, we'll have to wait and watch. Our next story is about a MAGA meltdown. Trump supporters are upset with him, and the president is scolding them on social media. This has to do with Jeffrey Epstein, a wealthy financier who ran a vast sex trafficking operation. He died in 2019 in jail. The circumstances around his death were controversial. Investigators said it was suicide, but conspiracy theories claimed that it was a murder, that he was killed because they wanted to silence him. They also claimed that Epstein maintained a client list to blackmail the high and mighty, a list that could expose powerful men who abused underage girls, and perhaps even explain how Epstein died. So how is this related to Donald Trump? Well, he had promised to release all the Epstein files, but now he has changed his mind, and his supporters are not happy about it. They're lashing out at the Trump administration. So the president took to social media to pull them up. He told his supporters to, quote unquote, not waste time and energy on Epstein. And this has only fueled more questions. What is in those files, and why is the US president hiding them? Here's a report.
Elon Musk is at it again. He once again targeted President Trump over the Epstein files. Over the weekend, he wrote this on his platform X. Seriously, he said Epstein half a dozen times while telling everyone to stop talking about Epstein. Just release the files as promised. The comment quickly went viral and put Trump back in the spotlight. The row revolves around Jeffrey Epstein, his vast sex trafficking operation, and Trump's promise to reveal what's inside the case files. As a candidate, Trump had vowed to make all Epstein files public, but the American president, for some reason, is now hesitating. Last week, Attorney General Pam Bondi, America's highest-ranking prosecutor, released a memo on the Epstein case. Many had hoped it would expose Epstein's client list. There is a theory that Epstein had kept a so-called client list as blackmail. Now, the Attorney General claims none of that exists. Her two-page memo said there was no credible evidence of a client list, and no proof that Epstein blackmailed prominent figures. For Trump supporters, the memo was a betrayal. It triggered angry reactions, especially from the right. For Trump supporters, this was a betrayal. Critics accused Bondi of hiding information. Some even called for her resignation. Trump rushed to her defense. He posted, "Let Pam Bondi do her job." He urged his supporters not to waste time and energy on Epstein.
Your memo and release yesterday on Jeffrey Epstein, it left some lingering mysteries.
Hey, Pam, could I just interrupt for 1 second? Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. Are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable. Do you want to waste the time, and do you feel like answering?
I don't mind answering.
But that only added fuel to the fire. Trump's base expected answers. Instead, he told them to move on. For many supporters, this felt like a complete reversal. They had stood with him through every scandal, every policy shift. But this, the Epstein files, has shaken their trust. It all came to a head at the Student Action Summit. There, frustration with Bondi and Trump's defense of her was palpable. The crowd wanted the files. The Justice Department made it clear it would not release any more information. Officials said the case was closed. The medical examiner had ruled Epstein's 2019 death a suicide. The memo said there was nothing left to find. But Trump supporters don't believe it. They are now asking, what's really in those files? And why is the president, their president, defending Bondi instead of releasing them? It's a question Trump wants to bury, but it has already taken on a life of its own.
It's mango season in South Asia. The fruit is not just a favorite among people, it's also a favorite in diplomacy. That's right, mango diplomacy is quite popular in our part of the world, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You send mangoes to leaders on the other side, a sort of sweet diplomatic gift. This time, India is at the receiving end. Around 1,000 kilograms of mangoes are heading to New Delhi. Guess from where? Bangladesh. Interim Chief Mohammad Yunus has turned to mangoes, specifically the Hari Banga variety. He sent shipments to Prime Minister Modi and a few Indian chief ministers. Now, the practice itself is not new. It was started by former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. She used to regularly send mangoes to Prime Minister Modi. But coming from Yunus, it's surprising. Is he looking for a reset? Or is this just a symbolic move? Well, India is not the only one on Yunus's list. He has already shipped mangoes to China. In April this year, he traveled to Beijing, and while there, he promised to send a box of mangoes to Xi Jinping. The next month, in the month of May, he did exactly that. He sent the first shipment of mangoes to Beijing, so the gift is not exactly exclusive to India. If anything, it's belated. Plus, it's hard to judge Yunus based on his words and gestures. He keeps saying that he wants closer ties with India, but his actions suggest otherwise. Just look at the issue of Sheikh Hasina. It's clearly a red line for the government of India. They want Dhaka to move beyond the issue, yet Yunus is not willing to do that. Look at what his press secretary said last week.
We now urge the Republic of India to act with conscience and moral clarity. For too long, India has refused to comply with Bangladesh's lawful request for the extradition of Sheikh Hasina.
So the policy remains the same. The only change is the mango outreach. Now, to be fair, it's a very symbolic move in South Asia. Mangoes first originated in this part of the world. It grew to be a decadent fruit, a fruit fit for kings and emperors. Even South Asian religions have a special place for mangoes. Our history is filled with mango diplomacy. Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb used it in the 17th century. He gifted mangoes to the Shah of Persia. In modern history, there are plenty of examples. Jawaharlal Nehru gifted mangoes to most visiting leaders. In 1968, Pakistan gifted mangoes to Mao Zedong. In 1981, Pakistan sent mangoes to Indira Gandhi. In 2008 and 2010, they gifted mangoes to former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and in 2015 to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So mango diplomacy has a special place in our history, and the symbolism cannot be discounted. The question is, how will India respond to this move? Well, New Delhi's position has been clear. It is more than willing to reset ties with Bangladesh. The ball is in Yunus's court. Last month, Prime Minister Modi wrote a letter to him. He sent greetings on the occasion of Eid. So New Delhi is ready to engage with the Yunus regime. The problem is from the other side. Unless that changes, no mango diplomacy will work. Dhaka must realize that both countries need each other. Around 94% of Bangladesh's border is with India. 94% of their border. They need Indian investments and support, especially looking at the current global environment. You see, when Yunus came to power, he had a friend in the United States, Joe Biden. Many experts in fact suspected a US role in Hasina's ouster. But Donald Trump is no friend. He has threatened 35% tariffs on Bangladeshi goods, which could be a deadly blow to their garment industry. Garments make up 80% of Bangladesh's exports. The sector also employs 4 million people. So recent events have narrowed Yunus's options. Perhaps he understands how vital India is. Either way, he will have to do more. Yunus has soured this relationship way too much. It will take more than one mango shipment to sweeten it. Now let's talk about America's latest betrayal. This one targets the Afghans, those who helped American soldiers against the Taliban. As you know, the US fought a 20-year-long war in Afghanistan. These men and women helped American soldiers. When the Taliban took over, they ran for their lives, but now the US wants to send them back. These people were living in the United States under a provision called TPS, Temporary Protected Status, TPS. It's like a temporary visa. It allows foreign nationals to stay and work legally in the United States. It's especially for those who face armed conflict, natural disasters, or other extraordinary conditions in their home countries. They can apply for TPS and they can stay and work in the US. Now, in 2021, after the Taliban took Kabul, several Afghans were granted this visa. Remember, the American-backed government had collapsed overnight. So these Afghans who worked for the government had to flee. This included soldiers, activists, and journalists. They all sought sanctuary. More than 11,000 Afghans were given TPS. That's according to one estimate. And now they face an uncertain future. The question is why? Why has the US government bailed on these Afghans? Because of a new threat assessment by Washington. This is what it says. Afghanistan is now safe enough for these people to return. That is the American assessment. Afghanistan is safe enough for them to return, even though only last month they put a ban. The Trump administration banned all arrivals from Afghanistan. They flagged Afghanistan as quote-unquote high risk. Why? Because, and I'm quoting, because of the rising level of extremist activity. This is what the Trump administration said. But now they want to send 11,000 Afghans to the same country. They want them to return. A country where women cannot work or go to school. A country that the US bombed for 2 decades and then left. So first they dumped Afghanistan, and now they may dump the people. The people who helped them in their so-called war on terror. The decision to terminate the TPS came into effect today.
A temporary protected status that, again, was always meant to be temporary. There was the opportunity for those that were here on TPS to apply
for permanent residence, while then also having the secondary part of it, which says, are we able to vet people coming into this country? And I think those are two separate dynamics.
So Afghans who don't have any other US visa may now be sent back. Like I said, this is a clear betrayal, although it is hardly surprising because it fits a pattern. In 2020, the Trump administration signed the Doha Agreement. It struck a deal with the Taliban to pull out of Afghanistan. But the Afghan government of the day, the government in Kabul, was kept out of this deal. And this was the very government that the US had spent 2 decades propping up. Suddenly, they were abandoned. The Taliban was given legitimacy. And within months, we saw the collapse of Kabul. The US forces withdrew, the Afghan government fell. In just 4 months, 20 years of nation building unraveled. What followed was chaos and a new security crisis for the entire South Asian region. Because it's not just the Americans who are forcing the Afghans to return, Pakistan and Iran are also deporting Afghan refugees. In April this year, Pakistan kicked off mass deportations. More than 80,000 Afghans were forced to leave. Same with Iran. This year alone, Iran has expelled more than 1 million Afghan refugees. About half of them were sent back in the last 5 weeks. For the people of Afghanistan, this is a nightmare with no exit. Neighbors have shut their doors, and the US, which called them allies and assets, the US, which promised to protect them, is abandoning them. These people now face the prospect of returning to Taliban country. For many, going back is not an option, it's a death sentence. America's decision has amplified the crisis. It's a signal to the world that Afghans can be discarded. Today, they have nowhere to go and no one left to trust. Every generation has its own ways of showing off. The boomers had golf. Gen X had leather jackets. Millennials had minimalism and matcha. The Gen Z and Gen Alpha, well, they're farming. Aura farming, to be specific. And no, this is not about growing vegetables on your balcony. In fact, this has nothing to do with real farming. This is spiritual agriculture. It's the digital age's answer to swagger. And its reigning champion is a child, an 11-year-old boy from Indonesia. His name is Ryan Arkan Dikha, and his moves have taken the internet by storm. Take a look at this first. Saw him there. He's all of 11. He has cool sunglasses, even cooler dance moves, and he dances on the head of a speeding, racing boat. Dikha is from a village in Indonesia. What you saw was a centuries-old boat racing tradition called Paku Jalur. These boats are long and majestic. They are rowed by teams of grown men, and standing on the prow is one little dancer. They're called the Toga Kluan. Their job is to keep the rowers hyped and in rhythm. Now, this was Dikha's first time at this race. It's hard to believe, given how he's performed. He has impeccable balance at the edge of a moving boat. He rolls his arms like wheels. He strikes a warrior pose. He blows kisses to the public. And not once does his expression change. Pure aura farming, as they say. The video has since gone viral, and now everyone is copying his dance moves, from PSG footballers to Formula One drivers and even Travis Kelce. So what is this aura farming? Here's a primer for those born before 2001. Aura farming is the art of looking cool, but not just any cool. It has to be effortlessly cool, the sort of unbothered energy you cannot fake. The term farming here comes from gaming and anime. You farm for loot or experience there. Here you farm for charisma points, for a magnetic aura. That is aura farming. And I will give you examples that I have learned about only today. Dunking your coffee cup into a dustbin, that is aura farming. Unbothered by the opinion of others, that is aura farming too. Doing what you want in your own way, that too is aura farming. And here's the main point. Aura points are not something you ask for, you have to earn them. Do it too much, and you may end up looking like that one uncle, one dancing uncle at every single wedding. So how do you aura farm? Well, here are some lessons from Dika himself. First, you have to own your look. You can be wearing anything and everything, but if you're not confident, it won't do much for you. So own your look. Second, say less and do more. Dika danced for a crowd, but he moved like he was alone. That's the blueprint. And the third and the most important thing is this. Do what you love. Aura farming is not performative, it is instinctual. Dika did not plan to go viral. He just did what he loved in the way only he could. That authenticity made him magnetic. He's now the cultural ambassador of his province. It also gave a centuries-old Indonesian tradition a new life. So I guess that's the takeaway. The tips are not new. The terminology is. This Monday, we found motivation in a dance with an 11-year-old reaffirming what we all know but find hard to practice. The ones with real aura do not chase trends, they are the trend. Sometimes it's just about showing up, staying balanced, doing your own thing, and dancing your heart away. So whether you're 11 or 61, find your flow, farm your aura, and don't kill yourself by trying too hard to impress others, because that is the biggest aura killer of all. Donald Trump may not have won the Nobel Peace Prize, but he did win something else yesterday, the FIFA Club Football World Cup. Now, technically, Trump is not a footballer, nor is he linked to the winning team. But when you're Donald Trump, you don't have to be. The final match was held in New Jersey. After the game, Trump was invited on stage to hand over the trophy. Normally, you give the prize and walk away. You let the team have its big moment. But not Donald Trump. He stayed on as the celebrations began, an odd man out among cheering, sweaty footballers. I guess it's not limited to ceasefires and trade deals. Trump wants credit wherever it is available. Now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Australia fires a long-range rocket system for the first time during war games with the US. A plane crashes moments after takeoff at London's Southend Airport. And a NASA astronaut shows off his yo-yo trick in space. Finally, we are taking you back in history. On this day in 2013, the world's last telegram was sent. It was by India's state-run BSNL. It officially shut down its 163-year-old telegraph service after that. This marked the end of the telegram era globally. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Firstpost now available in 9 languages on YouTube. English,
Stands at $36 trillion.
French,
Le FMI, comme
German,
Geschäftsführenden Direktor
Hindi,
$30 trillion ka karjo.
Indonesian,
Pemerintah tanpa pemeriksaan.
Italian,
Sekali radikali.
Japanese,
4 兆ドル以上も
Portuguese,
por causa do próprio balanço patrimonial.
Spanish.
Beautiful bill.
Go to Settings, click on Audio Track and select a language of your choice. Be the first to know what's happening around you in your first language. Firstpost.